Sandra Bullock has spent decades being Hollywood's ultimate sweetheart. Warm, funny, effortlessly likable. The kind of woman audiences trust without thinking twice. But here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. Even the nicest stars don't stay nice forever. Behind that glowing smile is a woman who has quietly drawn hard lines, shut doors, and walked away from people who crossed her boundaries. No screaming matches, no public meltdowns, just distance, silence, and reputations that slowly changed. Because when you live under constant judgment, under endless scrutiny, under a spotlight that never turns off, you learn quickly who drains you and who deserves to be kept far away. And Sandra Bullock, she learned that lesson the hard way. Over the years, she's clashed with some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Icons, Oscar winners, people you would never expect her to dislike. Some feuds were playful on the surface, but sharp underneath. Others were quiet, cold, and never resolved. One of them involved a role that changed her entire career and haunted another actress for years. Another revealed a rivalry so theatrical it felt like a Hollywood myth, yet was painfully real, and one in particular might completely change the way you see Sandra Bullock as a person. Today, we're diving into the 6 actors Sandra Bullock allegedly couldn't stand the most. And trust me, number 1 didn't just hurt feelings, it changed everything. If you believe the tension between Sandra Bullock and Angelina Jolie was about Brad Pitt, then Hollywood sold you the easiest version of the story. The truth runs much deeper, and it begins with one single film, Gravity. For Angelina Jolie, Gravity was never just another role. It was supposed to be her reinvention, a serious, stripped-down performance that could reframe her image, a role that promised box office power, critical respect, and awards season relevance. People close to Angelina said she wanted that part badly. She saw it as a turning point, but the role never became hers. It went to Sandra Bullock, and in that moment, everything quietly shifted. There were no public statements, no dramatic interviews. But inside Hollywood, the mood was unmistakable. Angelina was not happy. To her inner circle, it felt like something she had been circling for years was suddenly taken right out of her hands. Sandra Bullock, on the other hand, never celebrated loudly. She didn't name names. She didn't stir drama. But in 2014, she made one comment that landed harder than any accusation. I fought for Gravity. It wasn't handed to me. On the surface, it sounded harmless, honest even. But to those who understood the context, it was a line in the sand, a message that this role was earned, not gifted. And not everyone appreciated hearing that. From there, the tension never truly disappeared. When Oscar buzz later followed Angelina's By the Sea and First They Killed My Father, whispers began again. Sandra Bullock, known to be close with Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston, didn't appear to be quietly cheering from the sidelines. One insider put it bluntly, Sandra's loyalty isn't with Angelina, it's with Brad and Jen. Then came the optics that made everything colder. Sandra and Brad Pitt suddenly became Hollywood favorites together. The Lost City, Bullet Train, interview after interview filled with laughter and praise. Sandra publicly called Brad one of the most generous co-stars she had ever worked with. Angelina said nothing, but silence in Hollywood is rarely empty. In 2017, when asked directly about Sandra Bullock, Angelina delivered what many considered the coldest answer imaginable. I wish her the best, truly, but we're very different people. You know that tone, polite, controlled, distant, the kind that leaves no room for friendship. Today, there are no public feuds, no messy headlines, no direct confrontations, just distance. A quiet understanding that their paths no longer intersect. For Sandra Bullock, gravity became the wind that lifted her career into a new orbit. For Angelina Jolie, it remains the role that has slipped away. And in Hollywood, those kinds of losses don't fade. They don't heal, they simply go silent. Sandra Bullock has always described Hollywood as a battlefield, a place filled with pressure, politics, and silent competitors watching every move. But no rivalry ever fascinated the industry quite like her strange, half playful, half dangerous dance with the one woman no one dares to challenge, Meryl Streep. Their story didn't begin with hatred, it began with fear. The fear of standing face to face with the most decorated actress in Oscar history. During the 2009 to 2010 awards season, Sandra Bullock's The Blind Side catapulted her straight into the awards race. Suddenly, America's sweetheart wasn't just charming audiences anymore. She was competing for the highest honor in the business. And standing directly in her path was Meryl Streep. For decades, Meryl had been untouchable, respected, revered, almost mythical. And yet, instead of backing away, Sandra leaned into the absurdity of the moment. She left Meryl Streep a voicemail. "Watch your back. I'm going to cut you. I'm going to take you down." It was outrageous, bold, completely unhinged by Hollywood standards. And Meryl Streep's response? She sent Sandra a box of dead orchids, along with a message telling her to die. Sandra fired back by sending Meryl an entire case of liquor. What the public saw was comedy. What insiders recognized was something else entirely. Two powerful women testing each other's edges. Insiders called it the friendliest feud Meryl Streep ever had. But beneath the jokes was real competition, the kind that only exists when two people truly respect each other's talent. Sandra later joked, "People don't realize there's a side of Meryl that's mean. I know not to turn my back on her." Meryl never denied it. Her silence only made the legend grow. To outsiders, it looked like tension. But in reality, it was two titans sharpening each other through humor, sarcasm, and psychological games. Rivals who understood that the only way to survive Hollywood's pressure was to laugh while standing on the edge. Years later, during the 2014 awards season, the dynamic returned. Sandra was back with Gravity. Meryl was dominating with August Osage County. Sandra leaned into the rivalry once more, joking to reporters, "If the fight were physical, I'd try to kick her ass, but she'd kill me." It was half joke, half truth, because everyone in that room knew one thing. No matter how charming Sandra Bullock was, Meryl Streep remained a force you never underestimated. Today, the feud has softened into legendary stories. Dead orchids, threatening voicemails, liquor deliveries, Hollywood folklore passed around with laughter, but its legacy remains powerful. It revealed something most people never see. Even icons feel pressure, even legends need rivals, and even the strongest women in Hollywood sometimes survive by turning competition into theater. Sandra Bullock and Julia Roberts, two women who defined an entire era of Hollywood, two box office queens, two faces America trusted. And yet, there was one detail that always felt strange. They never worked together, they rarely appeared together, and for years, they barely even mentioned each other. In Hollywood, silence like that never stays silent. The rumors began in the 1990s, right after Speed turned Sandra Bullock into a superstar. Almost overnight, the media crowned her the next Julia Roberts. It was meant as a compliment, but it landed like a quiet insult. Julia Roberts later admitted that the comparison bothered her. Someone wrote that she was the next Julia Roberts, Julia said, and I thought that was silly. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't jealousy, it was exhaustion. Because Hollywood loved nothing more than placing women in competition, whether they agreed to it or not. One sweetheart had to replace the other, one throne, one crown. For years, the idea of a feud lived mostly in headlines and gossip columns. Then, in 2014, Sandra leaned into the absurdity during an awards speech, joking that tabloids claimed she and Julia were fighting over George Clooney. "We share custody," she laughed, "and we're both fine with it." The joke landed, but it also confirmed something important. They were fully aware of the narrative being written about them. Julia, for her part, dismissed the rivalry years later with a single dismissive sentence. "It's all projection." And that's when it became clear. The feud didn't live between Sandra Bullock and Julia Roberts. It lived in the public imagination. So where do they stand now? Not enemies, not friends, just two women who refused to let Hollywood manufacture a catfight where none truly existed. They chose different paths, different careers, different rhythms, and instead of colliding, they simply passed each other by. In the end, the Bullock-Roberts rivalry wasn't fire, it was smoke, a rumor that lingered because people wanted it to be real. In 1990s Hollywood, Sandra Bullock and Jennifer Aniston were never supposed to be friends. The industry didn't allow it. They were cut from the same mold, America's sweethearts, rom-com royalty. Women who could charm audiences, dominate the box office, and carry a film on their name alone. And Hollywood had a rule back then. There could only be one. Studios didn't need to invent a rivalry. Circumstances did it for them. Awards seasons placed them side by side. Interviews compared them relentlessly. Even their personal lives overlapped. Sandra Bullock dated Tate Donovan first. Later, he appeared on Friends as Jennifer Aniston's love interest. The tension didn't have to be spoken. It was built into the system. Sandra later admitted the truth with rare honesty. "We were from that time when no one wanted women to be friends. So for years, they circled each other at a distance. Always polite, always professional, never close. The message was subtle but constant. Only one woman could wear the crown of America's sweetheart at a time." Then came 2010, one wedding, one unexpected night. Both women arrived expecting the usual Hollywood small talk. Instead, they found themselves doing shots together like teenagers on a spring break. Sandra later laughed about the moment. "We were like, oh my God, we need to meet and cut loose," and we did. Jennifer joked that whatever she sent Sandra to drink was much stronger than what she received in return. That chaotic, silly night cracked years of manufactured rivalry wide open. And once the wall came down, something surprising happened. They realized how much they had in common. A shared obsession with interior design, a love for elaborate pranks, a belief in numerology, and above all, a deep respect for loyalty. Sandra was especially struck by Jennifer's generosity. "Nothing is ever for her alone," Sandra said. "She can be hard, but she chooses to be open." Their friendship deepened not in public moments, but in quiet ones. Sandra once described a flight where panic hit her hard, turbulence shook the plane, fear closed in, and it was Jennifer Aniston who reached across the aisle, grabbed her arm, and grounded her. Calm, steady, almost maternal. they discovered they shared a fear of flying, turning it into an unspoken ritual. Heads down, fingers locked, breathing through the fear together until the shaking stopped. Today, the so-called feud survives only as a relic of old Hollywood, a story born from an industry designed to pit women against each other. In reality, Sandra Bullock and Jennifer Aniston moved past competition long ago. What began as hesitation became trust. What looked like rivalry became one of the most genuine female friendships in the business. The rumored tension between Sandra Bullock and Ryan Gosling has always been one of Hollywood's most misunderstood stories. Not because there was anger, not because there was betrayal, but because timing can turn even the most respectful breakup into a headline. What many people forget is just how young Ryan Gosling was when it all began, and how heavy the pressure already was on Sandra Bullock. They met in 2002 on the set of Murder by Numbers. Ryan was only 21, a rising talent trying to survive Hollywood's chaos. Sandra was 38, already a global star, carrying the weight of expectations, schedules, and the scrutiny that never stopped. The connection between them was real. Gosling later called Sandra one of the greatest girlfriends of all time. Sandra described him as a calming presence in her life. Like a little Buddha, she said. In a world that never slowed down, he grounded her. But Hollywood doesn't respect timing. It destroys it. Ryan's career began accelerating rapidly. Sandra's workload was relentless. Back-to-back films, endless travel, endless pressure. And the industry itself became the third presence in their relationship. Gosling said it best years later. Show business is the bad guy. It takes all the light so nothing else can grow. Sandra, facing AGS pressure and an unforgiving schedule, eventually realized something painful but honest. The relationship couldn't survive the speed at which both their lives were moving. The breakup was sudden, yes, but it wasn't hostile. Tabloids, however, needed drama. They spun the story into bitterness, suggesting Sandra Bullock hated him afterward. The reality couldn't have been more different. Sandra never said a single negative word about Ryan Gosling, and Ryan never spoke of her with anything but warmth. Friends close to both insisted the split was sad, respectful, and unavoidable. Two people moving too fast in opposite directions. Ryan went on to build a life with Eva Mendes. Sandra later found love with Brian Randall, but what they gave each other stayed. The calm, the grounding, the lessons. Their story wasn't about feuding or regret. It was about timing, and sometimes that's the cruelest force of all. Among all the names ever linked to Sandra Bullock, the one that surprises people the most is George Clooney. Not because they clashed immediately, but because what began as a warm friendship slowly hardened into irritation, and then into quiet distance. George Clooney had a reputation on every set he touched. Charming, playful, a legendary prankster who believed laughter made work better. Sandra Bullock believed something else entirely. Their philosophies collided during the filming of Gravity. Sandra was suspended in harnesses for hours at a time, spinning, isolated, physically and emotionally drained as take after take pushed her to the edge. This wasn't a light-hearted production. It was brutal. Precision mattered. Focus mattered. And Sandra had no patience left for jokes. When Clooney slipped into his usual antics, she shut it down, hard. She told him directly that there was no place for humor on a film this intense. Behind closed doors, she even referred to him as an overgrown frat boy. For the first time in his career, George Clooney stopped. But the tension wasn't just about pranks, it was philosophical. Clooney liked to loosen a set. Sandra ran hers like a pressure-sealed submarine. One crew member described it perfectly. He's oil, she's water. Still, fate forced them back together. When Sandra asked Clooney to rework Our Brand Is Crisis for her, he agreed instantly. But he couldn't resist one last jab, joking publicly that she had stolen the role from him, hiding the sting behind a grin. To the outside world, the feud seemed to fade. They teased each other in interviews, posed together at premieres, smiled when cameras rolled. But insiders say the truth is simpler and colder. Sandra Bullock respects George Clooney, but she doesn't trust his style. George Clooney admires Sandra Bullock, but he never forgot being shut down so cleanly. Sandra once summed it up better than anyone ever could. He's a great friend, but not always a great co-star. And that line explains everything. Sandra Bullock's Hollywood clashes were never about ego or cruelty. They were about boundaries, about protecting her craft, about preserving her peace in an industry that rarely respects either. Every feud, every tension, every quiet standoff reveals the same truth. Sandra Bullock didn't become Hollywood's sweetheart by being soft. She survived by knowing exactly when to smile and exactly when to draw the line.